Hi, I'm Lucille. My parents used to call me useless, the daughter who never measured up. They let my sister pick dinner, pick the house, even pick the future that should have been mine. I was just the quiet one until the day the mayor said my name out loud. That was the moment everything they built started to crumble, and none of them saw it coming. I woke up that morning to the smell of coffee and the faint sound of clinking dishes. For a second, I smiled. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe they'd remember. I walked into the kitchen. Mom was scrambling eggs, Dad was thumbing through his phone at the table. No one looked up. I poured my own coffee. They were whispering about dinner. Something special, Mom said. My stomach fluttered. My birthday. They'd just forgotten to say it. That must be it. I lingered a little longer than usual, waiting. But the conversation kept circling around reservations, timing, whether to dress up. Dad chuckled, hope she's surprised. I almost said thank you, until Mom added, well, it's a big promotion. She earned it. My heart paused. Promotion? I sipped my coffee. Bitter. So was the silence that followed. Hours passed. Not a word. No text. No card. No mention. By late afternoon, I told myself I was too old to care. But the truth was, I had hoped. I always hoped. And that was the stupidest part of it all. Dinner rolled around. I walked into the kitchen, and there it was, a cake. But not just any cake. It was double chocolate mousse. Amanda's favorite. I stood frozen. Mom handed me a plate. Can you help slice this? The laughter, the clinking of glasses, Amanda's shrill voice showing off her promotion letter from the hospital. I held the plate like it was some kind of joke. My name wasn't on the cake. No candles. No singing. Just a room full of celebration. For someone else. Dad took pictures. Amanda posed. Mom leaned in, glowing with pride. I stared at my plate. Not even a flicker of hesitation crossed their faces. I stood there in silence, letting the sounds blur around me. Amanda said something about bonuses. Everyone clapped. I excused myself to the sink. As I scrubbed dishes, I thought about all the birthdays before. The oh shoot, I forgot us. The half-baked excuses. The time they left me home because Amanda really needed the support at her state championship. The cheap laptop I got for graduation while she got a car. They always said I was the quiet one. Lucille doesn't ask for much. That was just their way of calling me forgettable. I dried my hands on the towel. My back was to the laughter behind me. That towel caught more than just water. I crept upstairs. Closed my door. The noise dimmed. I opened the drawer under my bed and pulled out the old spiral notebook. Its corners were frayed. Inside were pages filled with sketches, land maps, zoning research, auction notes. I'd been reading about land ownership since I was 15. They didn't know. No one did. Grandma used to say, storms don't scare the ones used to being wet. I traced her words, written on the inside flap. I flipped to a fresh page and started writing, parcel numbers, contact names, properties for sale. There was one in town, cheap, neglected. But it was a start. Downstairs, Amanda laughed like she owned the house. I didn't need to be the favorite. I just needed out. I didn't hear them come up. Didn't care to. But I did hear my father's voice float through the floorboards. Lucille's never going to amount to much anyway. I sat still, my pen paused above the page. Then I whispered, steady and clear, we'll see about that. Saturday morning. No alarm, no plans. Just the hum of the ceiling fan and the clink of dishes. I washed myself last night. I was mopping the kitchen floor. Again. Mom and Dad lounged in the living room, half watching the news, half scrolling their phones. Emma was pacing the hallway, loud on speakerphone, bragging about her new role. I told them I needed a raise or I walk. They folded in 2 minutes flat. She sounded like a queen in her castle. I didn't expect anyone to notice me. I've been the one who blends into the walls for years now. You learn to move quietly when no one ever asks where you're going. While I wrung out the mop, I caught snippets of their conversation. She's going places, that one, Dad said. Mom sighed, proud and soft. Emma's going to carry the family name far. Lucille. Well, she's just floating around. Floating. Like driftwood. Like trash. I paused, mop still in hand. They didn't whisper. They didn't think they had to. Later, I sat across from Dad at the kitchen table. He was muttering over an electric bill that didn't add up. I offered to help. I knew how to check the meter, I'd done it before. He didn't look up. Just snapped, "I didn't raise you to be needy. You're a burden, not a blessing." There wasn't a sound in the room after that. I blinked. My hands sat flat on the table. His words just hung there, untouched. A burden. Not the times I quietly paid the gas bill when it went red. Not the groceries I stocked without ever asking for a cent back. Not even the weekend I patched the roof myself while they vacationed in Nashville. I swallowed it whole. The silence. The shame. The fury. That afternoon, I finished my coffee, slid on an old pair of sneakers without socks, and stepped into the backyard. No one stopped me. The breeze was warm. The grass was wet. My feet didn't care. I remembered something Mr. Arnold, my 10th grade history teacher, told me once. I'd stayed after class, too quiet to ask questions during the lesson. "Sometimes, the quietest students write the loudest futures," he said, handing back an essay I thought no one read. I never forgot that. I walked to the edge of the yard, near the fence line, where I'd once buried a time capsule when I was 9. Inside was a drawing of a house I wanted to build. Land. Trees. Solitude. A week after my 16th birthday, I bought a quarter-acre out near Grady Hollow. Just a patch of overgrown land no one wanted. I'd saved babysitting cash and took a Greyhound alone to sign the papers. No one noticed I was gone. Back inside, I grabbed my notebook, flipped to a blank page, and wrote, "Not a burden." Then circled it, hard, over and over. By noon, I was at the library. It smelled like dust and sun-faded ambition. I sat in the far corner, pulling up records on zoning laws and land auctions. I lost track of time. A soft voice broke the quiet. "Lucille?" I turned. Mrs. Penfield, the retired librarian. She'd aged, but her eyes hadn't. "You still carry that little notebook?" she asked. I nodded. "You always had something in you. I don't think your parents ever saw it. But I did." I don't know why those words almost made me cry. I found a listing, 35 acres of untouched woods an hour south. Cheap. Remote. No running water. But it had potential. I printed it and folded it into my pocket. By nightfall, I was home. No one had noticed I'd left. Dinner was over. Plates were in the sink. The house quiet, like always. I shut my bedroom door and clicked the lock. Standing in the dark, I whispered, "Let them call me useless. I'll make sure my name ends up on deeds, not dinner invitations." That morning I found water seeping under the kitchen sink, just a slow drip, but unmistakably there. I paused mid-step, towel still in my hand, and watched the little pool spread. Silence in the house felt heavier than any shout. My parents were upstairs, Emma was already out the door. I rolled up my sleeves. Fixing things was something I had always done. I didn't need applause. I just needed the problem gone. Dad stepped in while I crouched on the vinyl floor. He frowned immediately. "Must be your mess," he muttered. "You don't clean properly." His words landed like concrete. I glanced at the pipes. I thought of the tutorial I watched late last summer, tightening the washer, checking the line. I didn't mention any of that. I just went to work. I drove to the corner hardware store. Mr. Gordon, gray-haired, welcomed me with his usual half-nod. "Your daddy ought to be doing this," he said quietly as he handed me a pack of washers. I paid for it myself, small cash I'd saved from odd jobs. I smiled, but inside I burned. Some folks fixed the damage they won't own, I thought. He didn't laugh at me. He just ringed up the sale. Back home I lay on my side under the sink, flashlight angled upward. Pipes clanked, water dripped. I smelled the old damp wood of the cabinet. I replaced the part. I tightened the coupling. I stood and watched the floor dry. That night, no one said anything. The kitchen looked normal. It smelled clean. But the air remained charged. 2 days later I found Dad and Mom chatting in the living room. I was folding laundry in the other room. "Notice how calm the house is?" Mom said. "I bet Emma called the handyman she met last month. She's always thinking 3 steps ahead." I stopped folding. The word thinking echoed. "Not doing." I blinked. I understood then, they credited the quiet purchase of labor to my sister's image. Why fight for a moment's recognition when the battle was bigger? A neighbor dropped by around dusk. "Lucille, you're always the dependable one," she told me, Smiling used to. Dad smiled too. She's harmless, he said. Emma's the one with the fire. I thanked the neighbor quietly. Later, in front of the bathroom mirror, I said to myself, harmless isn't the same as helpless. I felt my jaw set. I retrieved my notebook on the dresser. I wrote, again, the headline, "They don't see what I fix," maybe because they never built anything themselves. My handwriting curved strong. Later that night, I got a thin envelope in the mail at the old address. Inside was a property tax notice, my name, clear as day. Landowner of record, it said. I pressed the paper to my chest. My feet were cold on the hardwood. I exhaled, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark. "I'll wait," I whispered. "And when everyone else sees the truth, I'll already have the map." I walked into the community hall in Des Moines just as the late afternoon light was pouring through the windows. The tables were draped in navy cloth, white chairs set in neat rows. There it was, my certificate tucked under my arm, a framed recognition from the urban planning department I had quietly earned. My father stood near the buffet line with Evelyn and her friends. He glanced at me once, then turned away. My heart sank. This had felt like my moment. I took a seat at the side table, off to the corner, hoping no one would see me waiting. But I was visible enough to hear their whispers, "Isn't that Lucille? They always keep her back." My certificate glowed under the light. I reached up and smoothed the glass. I told myself, I am more than invisible. The mayor stepped to the podium and began speaking of young visionaries shaping our town. My name sailed past, no call. Evelyn was mentioned first, her outreach work, her leadership. I sat still, the framed certificate on my lap feeling like someone else's trophy. My father shifted in his seat. My mother's eyes darted away. A friend leaned into Dad and said quietly, "She's doing so well, she's going far." The word "she" settled like a weight in my chest. When the moment came, I braced myself. The mayor said, "Let's present this award to Ms. Lucinda Monroe." My grip tightened. Lucinda. Not Lucille. His voice rose with applause. Evelyn stood and accepted the handshake, looked into the cameras. I remained seated. I caught my reflection in the glass wall, someone meant to fade into the background. A late teacher's voice reverberated in my mind, "Never let someone else coin your name for you." My grandmother's echo, "They all call you what they see, you call yourself what you are." I exhaled. I felt tears brimming, but not a sound left my lips. I headed to the powder room, closed the door, made myself look in the mirror. Self-aware. Frustrated. Angry in a steady way. I examined the certificate trembling in my hand. On the page, my name was there, clear. In the room, my name was ignored. I wrote in my notebook, "I will hold my own name in my hand." Then I recalled Martin Luther King Jr.'s words I learned in college, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." This was no longer about recognition at dinner, it was about being seen for who I'd been all along. I walked back into the hall, certificate rigid in my grip. I stood near the exit, head held high. The applause faded. I slipped into the twilight outside and found the car unlocked. On a passenger seat lay a file-stamped land acquisition proposal, "R. Liz Monroe." I opened it and stared at the bold letters. My pulse drummed. The town had tried to define our story one way. Now, I held the next chapter. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and whispered, "Who gets to say my name matters?" Late afternoon light spilled into my father's home office while I told myself I was just grabbing a book we could read together. The door clicked behind me and I froze at the desk. There it sat, a document stamped land transfer agreement. I stared at the heading, glanced at the photos of our family, the faded diploma on the wall. I picked up the paper and read the beneficiary line, "Evelyn Monroe." My father's signature was in faint ink beneath it. My heart sank like a stone. I paused. The kitchen timer beeped downstairs. He still hadn't noticed I'd entered. I tucked the paper into my purse, steadying my breath. I refused to let panic rule me. I'd done harder things. This wasn't about money, it was about recognition long denied. That evening I called my father into the living room. Documentary still flickering on the screen. I placed the papers on the coffee table. He frowned, asked softly, "What's that?" I slid the paper closer. He leaned over, Read. Blinked. My voice cracked. You signed for Emma. My mother entered. My sister stalked off without looking back. Silence pressed in. I said, were you too busy seeing her future to remember mine? The quiet beat heavy. I wasn't asking for sympathy, I was exposing the truth. I retrieved the notebook I always kept hidden. Listings, tax records, parcels, dates. I flipped back to the quote I saved, you don't get paid for what you do, you get paid for what you know. Then I cross-referenced the signing date with the listing I flagged months ago, the same parcel. I called the county clerk right from my living room. Transfer pending. I held the agreement tight and realized, the window was open, just long enough for me to act. I turned off the television. The room glowed with the screen's dying light. My father shifted uncomfortably, my mother stared at her hands. Evelyn returned, asked, what's going on? I stood. Documents in hand. I said, you're looking at the person who owns the land. Not just your other daughter. Their glances met. I stepped toward the door. My purse swung at my side. I'll handle the sale, you can handle the narrative. The silence drew thick around us. I knew the line I'd crossed, it wasn't one I regretted. I drove to the county recorder's office under dusk's purple sway. The air smelled of early spring and fresh asphalt. A text from Evelyn lit the car, don't ruin the family. I glanced at the message. Folded the phone. I stared at the courthouse steps and the headlights. I whispered to myself, I'm not asking for their permission anymore. I woke early with the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and a mug of black coffee at my fingertips. The morning light filtered through the old curtains as I pulled up my browser. My property list was there, parcels I'd marked, deeds I'd studied, and then the notification popped up, local news, Monroe's sister acquires land in county. I clicked it before thinking. The screen loaded. Evelyn's face smiled into the camera. But what caught my throat was the line underneath, youngest landowner, Evelyn Monroe. My name appeared in fine print as the legal owner. My pulse slammed against ribs. They used my name, and stole the story. I shut the laptop with quiet force and stood, looking out over the dry Iowa fields I used to walk as a kid. That flat horizon felt smaller now, until I decided that horizon would become mine. I didn't tell anyone. I called Jarrell, as if we were meeting over coffee, but it turned into strategy. He confirmed what I suspected, there was promotional footage, the voice was mine, the vision was mine, but the headline, the handshake, the press room, they were hers. I packed my briefcase with copies of title paperwork, ledger pages, emails I'd hidden for months. My palms stayed steady. I practiced saying, you don't get to speak my story for me. I repeated it until it climbed into my bones. I reminded myself of Maya Angelou's line, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I drove to the small conference room downtown. The engine thrummed, the sun high. My resolve tightened. I was done staying silent. I arrived late. The flash bulbs were already popping. Evelyn stood at the podium, looking polished in a navy suit, PR people flanking her. She announced proudly, I am honored to be your youngest major land investor. I gripped the printout titled in my name. A reporter asked, what role did your sister Lucille play in this? Evelyn smiled and said smoothly, oh, Lucille is working in the city, this was my initiative. My jaw clenched. Quiet is not surrender. In the back, I fixed my eyes on my certificate. The reporters turned to me. Lucille? Would you like to respond? My voice cleared as I walked forward, yes. I'd like to clarify one thing. The room hushed. I took the mic. With measured tone I said, here is my signed title document, dated 6 months ago, long before this press stunt. I handed the papers to the lead reporter and watched the camera lights flare. Evelyn's smile cracked. My father's face appeared in the live stream, shock change everything. If you're claiming a story that's mine, I'll tell it myself, I ended. Then I turned and walked off the stage. My heart soared. This was my voice, reclaimed. Outside the building the dusk light crawled across my shoulders. I raised my phone. A message came in from Evelyn, we need to talk. Please don't ruin everything. I folded the phone. I looked at that title in my hand, my name large and clear. I started the engine and whispered, You already did. I arrived at the courthouse steps that Thursday morning with a stack of papers in my hand and more years of quiet than I thought I could carry. The air was chilly, my breath visible in the early light. I clutched the folder labeled injunction like it mattered more than just ink and seal. It was the line I finally drew. When I had signed corporate leases on similar marble steps in the past, I never felt this hollow. This time I felt everything. My lawyer hovered beside me and whispered, "If the judge grants this, the sale is frozen, your name stays in control." I nodded. I sat inside the courtroom, listening to doors open and close, watching others move like I used to, unnoticed. I repeated in silence, "This land isn't just property, it's proof I exist." I let that settle. The hearing ended and I walked out into light spilling over the lawn. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Press release. My parents' attorney, Monroe family statement, support for Evelyn's leadership initiative. My knees nearly gave out. My mother's signature was there. "Mom," I muttered. They weren't just ignoring me, they were rewriting history. The release described me as supportive behind the scenes and crowned Evelyn leader of the future. I read the words twice and then thrice. I felt a wash of pain, colder than I expected. A betrayal public. My parents' faces replaced in my mind with old photographs where my smile was smaller. I inhaled deeply, calf-high grass pressed by shoes I'd paced here in other times. They hadn't just overlooked me, they had recast me. I stood there on those steps and knew the fight had expanded. Journalists hovered. Live streams blinked the statement into millions of feeds. Comments under the video called me the quiet daughter again. I stepped into the back of my car, cracked the window, and shouted into the wind, "You can't silence what history records." I felt myself steadier than I'd ever been. I thought of Rosa Parks. I thought of those who sat when the world said stand. I typed, I didn't ask for their permission. I earned my name. And hit send. I decided then I would tell my story, on my terms. Not for sympathy. For accuracy. That evening I walked into the living room where dinner was barely touched, bread crusts cold on plates. My father looked up reluctantly, my mother studied a photo on the table, Evelyn sat still. I placed the title document and timeline on the coffee table as though they were as essential as the kids' lunchboxes I once packed. My father pushed back from his chair, voice shaky, "Lucille, I thought you were happy with your city job." I met his gaze and said, "Being ignored in the city was better than being invisible at home." The room shifted. My mother cleared her throat. Evelyn's face hardened. I stood. The air changed. I felt the line drawn between us. I walked out, dusk folding around me. I heard the door click behind me and didn't look back. In the car I drove out of town under twilight. The filing box sat beside me, quiet but present. My phone buzzed again, a message from Evelyn, "You'll regret this." I read it and folded the phone into the console. I stared at the box marked title, Monroe Land. My name printed bold on the cover. I started the engine. I whispered, "Try me." The gavel struck and the room fell into a hush. I sat straight-backed in that crowded courtroom, pinching the folder with my name on it. My palms were steady and my heart felt both heavy and light at the same time. Reporters' cameras flashed, Evelyn's face stared back at me, a mask of triumph suddenly lost its shine. My father sat a row ahead, his gaze distant, unsure. And there it was, my name on the screen, bold and clear. The land was frozen in my favor. I drew in a breath and thought of Maya Angelou, "You may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated," I whispered to myself, "this land, this name, finally mine." The doors opened and the crowd spilled outside, questions fading in my wake. I answered one, "Yes, I belong here." Relief washed over me, but a quiet voice reminded me, the fight isn't over. Back home that evening, my phone buzzed. A breaking news alert, my parents' attorney had issued a statement. Their words realigned, I, once invisible, was now acknowledged. My mother's voicemail left me trembling, "Lucille, I'm sorry." The hesitation hung between the words. I stared at the phone, unmoving, while shock and numbness took turns. Evelyn texted, "Congrats I guess." No exclamation point. No warmth. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I watched the newscast replay their retraction, this time naming me as rightful owner. Validation at last, late, but real. I realized that this acknowledgement doesn't wipe away years of being unseen. Instead, it changes who I become. The next morning I drove out to the property. Cornfields stretched around me, golden in the dawn. The breeze touched my face as I opened the gate and wandered across my acreage. I balanced barefoot on the porch of a past empty farmhouse, boots in hand. "Welcome home," I said softly to the earth beneath me. I pictured friends arriving for a humble celebration, no speeches, no cameras, just recognition. I planted a small flag at the boundary marker, Lucille Monroe, landowner. I turned on my phone and recorded, "For anyone ever told they're useless, this is for you." I felt the triumph in my chest, but also a strange quiet. Joy laced with memory of neglect. I acknowledged both. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft reds and purples, I sat on the porch swing of the little farmhouse I planned to build. The empty chairs beside me echoed years of silence. I opened my journal and scrawled, "I won the land, but I never got the dinner they promised." The quiet of the space reminded me what I had missed, the praise, the acknowledgement, inclusion. I called an old friend from my city days and said simply, "I did it." She replied, "I knew you would." My throat constricted. I reflected, power isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving myself right. The wind stirred. I whispered, "I forgive you, but I will never forget." The ache remained, a reminder that victory does not mean erasure. As twilight settled, my phone buzzed again. A headline, "Mayor awards Lucille Monroe youngest landowner of the decade." I stood and stared across the field. One steady breath. Then, they handed me the title, "Now I'll build the legacy." The mayor's letter arrived tucked inside a cream envelope, hand-signed in ink. They were naming the town's new trail after me, Lucille's Path. I stared at the wooden plaque they sent ahead of the ceremony, my name carved deep into its grain. It didn't feel real yet. I ran my fingers along the edges, still waiting to wake up. I sat at the kitchen table with a blank note card and tried to write a speech that wouldn't make my voice crack. Something about how distance isn't always measured in miles, it's in years of silence, in rooms where you're present but never asked to speak. I pulled open my jewelry box and pinned Grandma May's brooch to my blouse. "You were always destined for more," she once whispered while brushing my hair. She saw me before anyone else did. I checked my email. My old manager from the city wrote, "Proud doesn't even begin to cover it." I read it twice. The courthouse lawn was packed. Folding chairs in neat rows, kids perched on shoulders, dogs pulling at leashes. I caught a few faces nodding toward me, not out of pity, but recognition. Not as Evelyn's sister. Just Lucille. I scanned the crowd and spotted her in the back. Arms crossed. Sunglasses on. She didn't wave, but she didn't walk away either. And maybe that was something. The mayor took the podium and cleared his throat. "Lucille taught us that every voice deserves to be heard." His words settled heavy and kind. I stepped up next, paper shaking slightly. I didn't recite what I'd written. I just spoke from the place where my scars had settled. "This path," I said, "was carved by struggle, but it leads to peace." When I cut the ribbon, there was applause. But the moment after, the stillness, was louder. It was mine. The trail opened, children laughed, and I knew, this land will witness joy now, not rivalry. That evening, while the crowd thinned and cars drove off in puffs of gravel, Evelyn walked up. She stopped just short of the trailhead and said, "I was wrong." Her voice didn't crack. Neither did mine. I nodded, then turned back toward the sign. Some things take more than words to mend. My parents didn't come. But a bouquet arrived at my door with no name on the card. I knew the handwriting. I walked the trail alone that night. The breeze carried no noise but the rustle of leaves and the crunch of gravel. I let myself breathe in the quiet. It wasn't empty, it was enough. In my journal later, I wrote, "Some stories don't need perfect endings. They just need space to end." I chose not to countersue. I could have. But I didn't want to live in courtrooms anymore. I wanted to live. I booked my first therapy appointment the next week and realized, I had been carrying more than just paper and titles. I had been holding my breath. Weeks passed. Spring crept in with blossoms and birdsong. I broke ground on a small eco retreat. Nothing grand. Just 3 cabins and a garden, aimed at women who needed a fresh start. I named the first cabin Reclamation. It wasn't about revenge, it was about returning to myself. I submitted a grant to fund sustainable farming on the land. This voice, once boxed away, was now building something real. A girl from Nebraska emailed me, "My sister's always been the star. But watching you it made me feel seen." I replied, "You were always seen, you just needed a mirror." One morning, I stood under the wooden arch that read Lucille's path and whispered, "I was never useless. I was just waiting to be needed in the right way." A trail. A voice. A future, planted and growing. As I turned to leave, wind carried children's laughter down the trail behind me. I paused, let it wash over me. The field swayed gently like it knew it belonged. I glanced once more at the land, then toward the open sky. This isn't the end, it's where I finally begin.